I installed hidden cameras to catch my wife cheating. What I saw in the footage was much worse. It started a few months ago, around her birthday. Claire came home from work and was smelling like Axe body spray. At first I brushed it off. Not my wife. She loves me. We have been faithful to each other for years. But then the doubts started to creep in. I've had to start working late shifts, weekends too. Since we have been behind on our mortgage, my time at home has literally been less than 5 or 6 hours a day, and most of that time was spent asleep. But she rarely complained. In fact, most of the time she seemed happier when I left. Then one day I tried to kiss her on her neck and I saw a blemish there, as though someone else's lips had touched her skin. My first mistake was confronting her head on about it. Of course she denied. She yelled. She called me the bad guy. Typical cheater behavior. Worst of all, she got what she wanted. Insisted I start sleeping downstairs and saying that we needed a separation. Maybe even a divorce. All I got out of it was desperation and depression. She insisted that she was still faithful to me, but all the signs were there. I just didn't have the proof to back it up. What you need is a security system for your home, my buddy Chad said one night when I went to drink away my troubles. Wouldn't she realize what I was getting it for? I pointed out. So don't tell her. Wait until she is out of the house. And make it discreet. You know, cameras and the smoke alarms. Stuff like that, he said as he downed his whiskey. His half-brained scheme didn't sound that bad. And I knew that Claire had said she was going to spend the next few days at her mother's house to supposedly let things cool down between us. If I was going to get to the bottom of this, it was now or never. So that's what I did. As soon as I knew that she was gone, I contacted a local shop and had them come that afternoon. The technician didn't ask any questions, just put them exactly where I said that I wanted them and even threw in one of those doll cams as an extra bonus. I gave it to Claire as a peace offering, saying that I was sorry for the accusations. Sounds stupid, I know. What are the chances she would even leave the doll around to let me listen in on her? But then I know my wife. She is sweet and kind and loving, sure, but she is also very predictable. She put the stuffed doll exactly where I thought she would. I let a few more days pass, kept things amicable between us as I went to and from work. Then the next time I was off, when she again insisted that she didn't want to spend any time with me alone, I went to check the cameras. Finally, I could get the answers that I was looking for. The grainy tape started up around 13 minutes past 7 the previous night. That was about half an hour after I left for work. And I saw my wife sitting there on the bed, wearing nothing but a sheer robe staring up at the ceiling. At first I puzzled over what she might be doing. She was perfectly still, her back turned against the camera as she took off her robe, and I saw what looked like little marks on the edge of her shoulders. Then I saw a man enter the picture and I knew. I was right. She placed him on the bed, ready to mount him, and I almost wanted to turn and look away, disgusted with what she was about to do. Then, to my amazement, I watched as those little bumps began to gently push her skin outward. At first it wasn't noticeable. Just a slow curling of her back. Then suddenly the movement quickened and long pieces of bone broke out on either side. They made a cracking noise as I heard my wife scream out. I don't know if it was a sound of pleasure or pain. The bones pushed to the side and started to form sinew and stretched the skin to its limit. And I realized they were forming what appeared to be wings. Her lean form bent over toward the man that she had been pleasing for the night, and I watched in abject terror as her mouth widened to reveal rows of sharp teeth, more than even a shark might have. Her lover's screams were now the ones that filled the void of the room. Blood splattered on our clean sheets. Muscle and skin ripped apart like wrapping paper. Her fingers gnawing into his open chest cavity like claws as she ripped out his beating heart and then began to chew on it like a piece of jerky. Her wings spread wide and she lifted her meal from the bed, moving him to the floor right in front of the camera to finish him off. I don't know how long she continued to eat. I couldn't bear to watch any longer. Then I looked toward the room in confusion, trying to understand how it was possible for the video to correlate with my pristine room. I never knew her to be a good cleaner, and surely there had to be some trace evidence of the body she had likely disposed of time and time again. Then I heard a noise behind me, and I turned to see her standing there. She saw that I was looking at the footage, and I am certain that if I could see my face it was likely paler than a ghost. Without a word, Claire crossed the room and looked down at the doll, playing with the strings like a cat might a ball of yarn. Then she crushed it slowly in her hand. It took less than a few seconds for her to reduce it to rubble. Moving to the bed, she crossed her legs and smiled at me that same way she had when we first started dating. So, what happens now? She asked. I found myself at a loss for words. Then finally I went over toward her and smiled nervously, remembering the other cameras in the house. Remembering she didn't know what all I had seen or if I had saved anything. I get everything in the divorce. Or I will leak what I have all over the internet to every priest, demon hunter and damn X-file junkie there is. Are we clear? I said with the best poker face I could muster. I knew she could kill me in a heartbeat. But I also knew if that was her goal she would have done that years ago. She needed me, for what I don't know. But all she did was nod and kiss me slowly. It was fun while it lasted. Wasn't it? She asked as she got up from the bed. I never saw her again after that night, and I hope I never do. Oh, and one more thing. I don't think I'm ever going to uninstall these cameras. My wife and I have been playing hide and seek for 3 days straight. I don't know what to do. In the past 72 hours my life has been turned upside down. Our family has been thrown into chaos. My wife is missing, and I fear she'll never return. Let me start from the beginning. My wife and I started playing hide and seek with our 2 young kids. However, they're a little too young to hide effectively. They always hide in the same spot, every time. So we found it's more fun for one of us parents to hide, and then the rest of us seek. I've hidden from my wife and kids just by standing completely still in the corner of a dark room. It's amazing how our brains are programmed to see things that move. My wife gets a little more creative, but it's hard for us to do anything too elaborate because the kids are not very cooperative and waiting for us to hide. On Tuesday evening after work, we decided to play. My wife decided to hide first. I counted down from 10 with the kids holed up in the downstairs office. Ready or not, here I come. The kids bounded out of the room like wild dogs. I followed, slowly, trying to get a sense of where my wife was hiding. I'd often try to figure out what room she was hiding in first, to gently guide the kids so that we wouldn't find her too soon, or spend too long looking for her. I saw her when I entered the living room. She was crouched behind the couch. I could see a bit of her elbow poking out from behind the upholstery. The kids walked right past her, too intent on checking the kitchen. I waited for them to return. As they walked back in and rounded the couch, I waited for them to squeal into light. Except they didn't. Confused, I approached the couch. She wasn't there. Huh. Maybe I'd just seen a tag or something poking out. Or maybe she'd moved her hiding spot. Wouldn't be the first time. As I said, she's more creative at this than I am. So we moved on. We checked all the usual spots underneath the shelving in the garage, behind the kitchen door, and even in the lower kitchen cabinets. She wasn't in any of those spots. Maybe she went upstairs. I hadn't heard her go upstairs, but she can creep pretty quietly. I walked along the hallways, the kids in tow. Jesse, I called, in a sing-song voice. We're going to find you. Gotcha. Our bedroom door was open, and there was a long, chest-shaped lump under the covers. Let's check Mom and Dad's bedroom, I said to the kids. Pattering footsteps as they charged behind me. I reached for the light switch, flicked on the lights, then grabbed the hem of the comforter and yanked it off. My heart dropped. The bed was empty. I stared down in confusion. It must have just been bunched up weirdly, but I could have sworn it looked like a person under there. The rough shape of someone in a fetal position, legs bent, back curved. I backed out of the room. The kids and I went downstairs. Jess, I called out. We can't find you. Come on out. Nothing. The kids lost interest. They bounded into the family room and began playing with their cars. I was about to call out to her again, when I noticed the chain of the basement door lock was disengaged. Aha! As I approached, my heart hammered in my chest. I knew she was waiting on the other side. Waiting to jump out at me and give me a heart attack. She'd done that before. I took a deep breath and swung open the door. She wasn't there. Damp air wafted up from the basement. I clicked on the light. Jess? I called out. No answer. The kids aren't playing anymore, I called down. And you shouldn't be hiding down there anyway. These stairs are too dangerous. Nothing. I turned, about to close the door, but then something caught my eye. Black hair. Poking through the gap between the stairs, about halfway down. She's hiding under the stairs. I stepped down. The wood creaked under my weight. The hair glistened below me in the dim yellow light. I continued down the steps, avoiding stepping on her hair until I was standing on the concrete floor. I whirled around. Aha! But the space under the stairs was empty. My blood ran cold. Jess, this isn't funny, I shouted. Stop playing games with me. A footstep sounded behind me. I whirled around. The naked bulb in the ceiling only lit half the basement. The other half, where we had rows and rows of storage boxes, was in near total darkness. But I squinted, trying to make it out. In the murky darkness, behind a stack of boxes, in the corner I thought I could see her standing there. I could only see her in my peripheral vision. Like how you can only see dim stars when you're not looking right at them, because of how your optic cells are arranged. I focused on one of the storage boxes, really stared at it, and when I did, I realized I could see her pale calves, extending up into the darkness. And, as I stood there, I realized I could hear her breathing. I can see you there, I said, my voice wavering. Why are you being so weird? The kids aren't even playing anymore. So come out. Please. Deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew there was something wrong. Something is wrong. So I chickened out. I'm going upstairs. You can join me when you're ready. I headed for the stairs. But halfway there, the bulb flickered and went out. Total darkness surrounded me. I stretched my hands out, blindly groping into the darkness. They only fell into the air. I frantically pawed through the air, searching for something, anything. My fingers caught in something. Hair. I screamed and yanked my hands back. Then I ran blindly into the darkness, but something glanced off me. I shoved at it. I heard a dull thwack and then I kept running. The side of the banister caught me straight in the chest. Panting, I felt my way to the stairs and climbed them as fast as I could. Then I locked the door to the basement and frantically ran to my kids. They were fine. But as I hugged them, I couldn't get the horrible thought out of my mind. The hair I'd felt was higher than my eye level. About 6.5 feet off the ground. Jess is only 5'2". The police searched the entire house. My wife isn't here. They searched the backyard and patrolled in a 3-mile radius. They came up empty-handed. It's like she disappeared off the face of the earth. Except, last night, as I rolled over in bed, I swear my fingers touched something warm. My wife would post herself eating online. Her food obsession quickly escalated into cannibalism. I swear, it all started out innocently enough. My wife and I had fallen on hard times due to the pandemic. She'd gotten laid off from her position and my hours have been cut due to our clients tightening up their purses the last couple of years. We had a toddler, Marcia, and a cat to feed, as well as ourselves. It was eating up our savings. We didn't want to be without a home. We were terrified. One night, while we were sitting at home, she had, at least I thought, jokingly talked about creating an OnlyFans. We toyed with the idea a bit and eventually her face got more serious and she started talking numbers. I loved Carol, I trusted her, and honestly we could use the money. We talked for a while longer about it, what our boundaries were on. We agreed that it wouldn't be anything outright lewd or erotic, and she suggested the idea of eating in front of a camera. Apparently it's a thing, whatever, I guess. I agreed. It seemed harmless enough. It started out harmless. We set up a camera in our spare office, facing the desk. Every other night, she would order takeout and eat in there while filming. She would post it wherever online. Things carried on normally like this for a couple of months. She'd order her own food, stuff herself in another room while we ate at the dining table. I'll admit, the money was good. Good enough that it actually surpassed what she would have been making working a normal job. Carol bumped up to filming once a day. One day at lunch and the other day at dinner. Of course she gained some weight, but, hell, I'm no prime example of vigorous health. As the weeks went on, she spent more and more time filming these eating videos. We paid off the remainders on our auto loan. We put down a good chunk on our mortgage. We were able to start a college fund for Marcia. Our savings account was looking healthier than ever. Her health, however, wasn't looking too hot. She'd begun to lose breath quicker than usual. Eventually she stopped coming on our family walks in the park. It wasn't a big deal, just a couple times a week we would go to stretch our legs. After a while she said she would prefer to stay home for the time being. At this point I started to get a bit more concerned. No amount of money is worth throwing away your health, even if our insurance would cover whatever came up. I remember talking to her about it, that maybe she should slow down with her project and maybe even cut it off entirely. She was furious with me, she cried. She asked me if I still loved her. Of course I told her I do. I did. She was the love of my life, she'd given us our beautiful daughter. I caved in and just pleaded with her to be careful. She didn't listen. As a few more months passed, we saw her less and less. She moved a television into the office. She got a larger, more comfortable chair to sit in. She'd gained so much weight in half a year I did not think it was possible, and I knew for sure that it wasn't healthy. She was having trouble standing without aid, and it seemed like she almost wouldn't fit through the door to the office, if she tried. I confronted Carol once more about it, and I swear I've never seen my wife get so furious. She was red in the face as she waved her hand around the house. Keep your goddamn nose out of my business. This entire house and you are being paid for by my work. If you don't support me here, then I will find someone who does. Our daughter had peeked in and began crying. It was horrible to see her like that. I couldn't argue with her, she did support us at this point. I began to take her meals to her, at her demand. She would take the food and glare at me until I left the room again. Any further attempts I made at making her see sense was met with threats of divorce. Of taking our kid. Of destroying my life. I guess I justified myself in being part of this. At least the rest of us were comfortable. Money was not an issue to us anymore, and that particular nightmare is not one I ever want to revisit. I used to think financial troubles were the worst kind of nightmare I'd ever face, and honestly, they're still up there. A year passed, her mood got worse and worse, and Carol got more and more obsessed with her followers. I never thought that I would describe my wife as looking monstrous, but it almost seemed as if her limbs had begun to shrink. Her arms and legs looked like spindly, useless attachments to her mass. Her neck had fattened to the point that it looked like her head was attached directly to her massive torso. Her mouth seemed much wider than before and she was almost always sweating. She began to scream at me for more food, always more. She would sob if she did not get it. I had to. I didn't want her to suffer. I never wanted her to suffer. Our cat disappeared 1 month ago. It happened on a night when I had taken Marcia out to the playground. Carol had texted me. I am hungry. Bring me something, now. I texted back that we were at the park. We wouldn't be back for another half hour or so. I am starving. We got back with a couple large pizzas for her. Our cat is a bit shy so I didn't notice until much later in the day he was gone. God, I just assumed we'd left a window open or something. I swore I was crazy. Carol's limbs actually looked like they were getting shorter. Retreating within her. She did not look like my wife. Maybe it wasn't my wife. The next week I was looking through our accounts for the first time in a while. Her deposits had stopped a month ago. She didn't listen to anything I say. I told her she needed to see a doctor. She could not stand up. I began to cut back on how much food I would bring into her, but it didn't seem to halt her growth, which was noticeable on the daily now. All it did was enrage her. She would get red, her face contorted into a snarl, spittle flying from her wide mouth. She would point a shriveled, atrophied arm and scream curses, her eyes beady and full of fury, recessed into her massive head. Her hair had begun to fall out. I was so damn terrified. I could not go in and feed her that last day. I could hear her screaming. Then she called for our daughter. Marcia went in. Marcia did not come out. I got worried. I opened the door. I saw Marcia's foot laying at the base of the monster that used to be my wife. When I saw it I couldn't move for what felt like hours. The monster saw my look of horror. I don't know what happened. I saw the monster move for the first time since it consumed my wife. I don't know how many months ago. It heaved itself off its perch. It almost seemed to slither, drag itself over towards the door. It couldn't fit through the doorframe. It pressed hard against it. The doorframe of the office began to creak horribly and bulge outwards before I came to. I ran. I got in the car. I drove. I'm out now. I submitted a police report. I don't think they took me seriously. I pray to God that monster is found soon. I hope other families aren't affected the same way I was. Because I can tell you one thing for sure. That is not my wife.
What was the most traumatic thing your wife ever did in front of your child? My 32-year-old wife threatened to kill herself a couple of days ago. My wife and I moved back into my parents' house to save money for a down payment on a home 8 months ago. My wife always thought my mother never liked her since my parents are Jamaican. I assured her that it had nothing to do with her. At first, they tend to be quiet when they meet any girl I bring home. After we got married, we both agreed to move into my parents' house to save money. After having our first daughter, things began to go downhill. My wife is somewhat very organized. My parents are the complete opposite. If things aren't put away in order, my wife gets very upset about it. She constantly complained about it every day. One day, I asked my mother why she left my daughter's dirty bibs and pacifier on her high chair, wrapped in a pile. My mother said she didn't do it. I guess she lied. She watched our daughter for us that evening, as we went out for dinner that night. My mother and I, like usual, raised our voices. It's a Jamaican thing. We weren't actually mad at one another. My wife decided to get involved one time, because she thought things were getting heated. My mother told her that she wasn't involved in the discussion. My wife snapped and said, "Don't yell at me." This resulted in my mother yelling back and storming off. All hell broke loose. My mother got things off her chest that appeared to have been festering for quite some time, since we moved in. As a husband, I defended my wife. Shortly after the fight, my wife said she didn't feel safe around my mother. She also decided that she didn't want my mother interacting with our daughter at all. I didn't agree, but I let it be. I wanted us to cool down for a while and move on. For context, my wife's mother had an ex-boyfriend who yelled at my wife all the time. He emotionally abused her in her own home, while her mother stood by and said nothing for months. She has trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder because of that incident. It took her 8 years to forgive her mother. She said that the fight with my mother brought up the same trauma. This is also why she did not feel safe around her, and did not want our daughter to be near her. 2 days later, I went upstairs to speak to my mom alone to apologize for the way I spoke to her. I tried to patch things up, as my wife took it to the extreme by packing up all of our belongings without my knowledge or consent. After speaking with my mother, I told my wife I did so. I requested that she compromise and not put our daughter in the middle of this. My wife refused and continued to say she felt unsafe. It was ridiculous. My mother has never hurt our daughter in any way, shape, or form. Days passed, and my wife still kept our daughter and herself segregated from my parents out of spite. One evening after work, I took my daughter to say goodnight to my parents. My daughter leapt out of my arms to my mother, and my wife came upstairs shortly after. She put on the angriest face I've ever seen. My father witnessed this. He was clearly so fed up. I took my daughter downstairs. My wife immediately blew off on me, saying, "Really? After I said I don't want your mom touching her, you let her hold her? It's either them or we divorce." Of course, I was in shock. I explained to her that our daughter wanted to go to her grandmother. My wife wasn't having it. She stormed off. Then, she typed away on her laptop as if threatening me with divorce wasn't a big deal. My father texted me, asking to speak to me privately when I finished putting our daughter down for bed. I left our daughter with my wife and went upstairs to talk to my dad. He started yelling. She said that my wife was disrespectful for threatening to divorce me over my mother holding her grandchild. I broke down. I cried so hard. My wife always threatened me with extremes like this over any marital disagreement. I let my dad vent what I've always felt but didn't have the courage to say. My dad then proceeded to yell at my wife, saying he wanted her out of his house. I finally calmed my father down. My wife and I packed our stuff. We left and went to her mother's house to stay for a few days. The next day, I told her she needed to put her feelings aside. I asked her to think about our daughter. Where will she live? She lost it. She said that I was invalidating her feelings. She then ran to the kitchen and pressed a weapon to her throat. She did all this while I was holding our daughter. I immediately ran away to the other room and told her to calm down. My wife's sister came. I told her what happened. She was not shocked. She told me to be careful. I called the police today to file a report. They talked to my wife. She told them that she already got in touch with her therapist. She lied, of course. The police essentially dismissed my concerns. They said, "I don't know why you bothered calling us when this happened 5 days ago." I explicitly stated to the dispatcher that I didn't call 911 right away, because I was afraid of what my wife might do. I also didn't want her to lose custody of our daughter. I don't know if the cop being female created some bias. I could be wrong. After the police left, my wife texted me. She said that I was a freaking idiot, and I made things 1,000 times worse. She said she was afraid they would review her medical records and eventually lose custody of our daughter. She already accused my parents of wanting to get custody of our daughter. She also said that I was not allowed to be with her and our daughter, as I made her mental health much worse. After a couple of days, thankfully, my wife calmed down. She now allows me to take my daughter to my parents' house without her. I think the intervention of the police somehow did something to her.
My wife has been missing for 15 years until she called my phone out of the blue. I don't like to talk about what happened 15 years ago. I don't even like to think about the fact that on January 7, 2008, Sarah Collins, a beloved member of the community, left home to run an errand and was then never seen again. It was a huge case back then. Everyone seemed to want to know what happened to her, but no one was more desperate for answers than I was. Sarah and I had been married for 5 years. I knew as soon as I met her that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. She had one of those smiles that just lit up a room. That's why it was so hard to believe that such a beautiful, successful woman had seemingly disappeared. They hadn't even recovered her body. 15 years later and they still didn't have a shred of evidence. Not a tire track, or even a fingerprint. Nothing. The police put out an appeal, but no one came forward. Somehow, not a single person had seen her. It was like she had just vanished without a trace. I think about Sarah a lot. I could never quite bring myself to take down the photos of her from around the house. Sarah's bright face still smiles down at me from every room. There's one photo of her, from our wedding day that I love. Looking at it is like looking straight at her. It captured her perfectly. 2 days ago, I found myself staring at it, really getting lost in the details. Her eyes, the way the corners of her mouth were lifting into a smile, the small dimple on her left cheek. I was looking at it so intently that I almost didn't notice the phone ringing. It was the landline phone, which was odd, as no one ever called me on the landline anymore. It was all mobiles nowadays. When I looked at the caller ID, it was an unknown number. I shrugged, and picked it up anyway. It was probably just the bank, calling to confirm something. The call took a moment to connect, but when it did, I heard a strange rustling sound on the other end of the line. Hello? I wasn't in the mood for any prank callers. Is anyone there? Hello? Daniel? Daniel, thank goodness I finally reached you. The voice on the other end of the line was a woman's voice, shaking and breathless. Daniel, it's me. It's Sarah. Are you there? When I heard her name, it was like my heart had stopped beating for a moment. Sarah. My Sarah. But that was impossible. Sarah had gone missing 15 years ago. Whoever this was, it was not my wife. I don't know who you are, but you're not Sarah, I hissed into the phone, coldly. Stop calling this number. I had dealt with a lot of these calls, especially when Sarah first went missing. Con artists, fraudsters, and anyone who wanted to manipulate a grieving husband. I knew none of them were my wife. No, Daniel, wait, you have to listen to me. It's me. Sarah. You have to believe me. She was sounding shrill and desperate now, even a little hysterical. The lengths that people go to in order to sell a lie are astonishing. Why are you doing this? I asked, angrily. It's been 15 years since my wife disappeared. What do you want from me? For a moment, the woman on the other end of the line didn't respond. I was beginning to think that the call had disconnected, when she finally spoke. Daniel, please. It's me. It's your wife, Sarah, the woman begged. I'm telling the truth. It's me, she continued to plead, but I'd had enough. I wasn't going to listen to this liar anymore. Don't call this number again, I firmly told her, hanging up. I thought that would do it. She wouldn't be likely to call me again. I assumed it was all over. The next day, I had asked a friend to help me repair my plumbing system. He was a good friend, I'd known him since college. He had been there for me when Sarah disappeared, getting me through it. We were both taking a break, catching up on the important events in each other's lives when my landline phone began to ring again. Sorry, I have to take this. It might be important, I said, getting up from my seat and making my way to the phone. I noticed that the call was coming from an unknown number, just as it had the day before. I didn't make a connection right away. After all, it could have just been the bank this time around. I picked up the phone, and I heard the same rustling sound. It was unsettling, in a strange way. I almost felt like I had heard it before. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Hello? I was already beginning to get a good idea of what this call was, and I wasn't happy about it. I told you not to call this number. Daniel, thank goodness I finally reached you. The very same words that she had said the day before. Daniel, it's me. It's Sarah. Are you there? It was undoubtedly the same woman. I don't have the time for this, I hissed into the phone. I know you're not Sarah. Stop calling me. I hung up the call and walked back to my friend, who looked confused. Who was that? He asked me. I heard you saying Sarah's name. Is everything okay? It was some prank caller, trying to pretend to be Sarah, I told him, rolling my eyes. I thought that I had left it all behind. I even changed my phone number. I don't know how this woman got hold of my new one. Pretending to be Sarah? My friend echoed. That's really strange. Did you tell anyone about it, like the police? No. I shake my head. There's no need. It's just someone trying to cause a bit of drama. They probably want money, or something like that. I made it clear that was the end of the conversation. I didn't want to continue talking about it, bringing up harmful reminders of the past. I woke up the next day, not expecting to get any more calls from the unknown number. I made it very clear that I wouldn't be participating in her charade. However, I was quickly proven wrong. As soon as I started to walk downstairs for a glass of water, the phone rang again. I thought about letting it ring, but I had a better idea. I was going to issue a much stronger warning to the caller, even threatening to get the police involved if the calls wouldn't stop. That would scare her, I was certain of it. I picked up the phone, hearing the very same eerie rustling. I couldn't explain it, but it made a shiver run up my spine. Finally, the call connected. It was just the same as the other times, the same pathetic monologue. Daniel, thank goodness I finally reached you. Maybe it was even a recorded message. Daniel, it's me. It's Sarah. Are you there? If you don't stop calling this number, I'll have no choice but to involve the police, I told the caller. This is harassment. If you want money, try conning someone else. Before I could even give the woman on the other line a chance to answer, I hung up the call. Hopefully this would show her that she wouldn't be manipulating me. I could see right through her elaborate scam. I was sure that my warning would stop the calls coming in. I was so sure of myself that when I was woken by a loud, persistent ringing sound the next morning, I didn't even think to connect it to the unknown number of calls. I first assumed it was my alarm, waking me up, but when I turned to look, I saw that the alarm hadn't gone off yet. That was when I concluded that it was the landline phone. I rushed down the stairs, wanting to tell the caller that I would be taking police action, wanting to catch out the desperate scammer. Fortunately, I got down there in time, and picked up the phone. Holding it to my ear, I heard that creepy rustling that I had become familiar with. It still made my heart beat faster, just for a few seconds until the call connected. Daniel, thank goodness I finally reached you. The usual message of hysteria came through the phone. I was well used to hearing it by now. Daniel, it's me. It's Sarah. Are you there? I gave you a warning. I said that if you called again, I would be taking legal action. I spoke into the phone, loudly so that whoever was on the other side would be sure to hear me. You've gone too far now. I have to do something about this. I waited for the woman to respond. Daniel? No, it's me. I'm not lying to you. I would never lie to you. Daniel, it's me, Sarah. Your wife, it's me. I can't stand the high-pitched whine of her voice. You're not Sarah, I told her, bitterly. I know you're not Sarah. I will be taking action. Goodbye. I hung up the call for the final time and placed the phone back. I know that woman wasn't Sarah. I know for a fact she wasn't. I know it, because, on January 7, 2008, Sarah Collins, beloved member of the community, was unalived. And I was the one who unalived her. Sarah was an incredibly beautiful woman. I couldn't believe my luck when she first started showing interest in me. I didn't exactly have a lot of experience when talking to women, and I was ecstatic that someone like Sarah had chosen someone like me. I loved her, for every single second of our marriage. I loved her, even when I found out that she was cheating on me. I had accidentally stumbled across a string of romantic messages between Sarah and one of her co-workers. She was planning to leave me for him. Sarah, my Sarah, was planning to leave me for him. I couldn't have that. She was so beautiful, so bright, so full of life. I couldn't lose her. I just couldn't lose her. So I unalived her. I didn't have to think about it for long. It was the only way that she would be mine, only mine forever. If she was dead, she would never leave me. She would always be my Sarah. When the police arrived, I made up an elaborate lie that she had gone out to run an errand and never come home. That very same lie ended up on the headlines of the national news. I didn't know if I would even get away with it, but a year passed, and then another year, and then another. 15 years passed, and no one ever saw through me. I was about to walk back upstairs, when I heard a small tapping at the window. Click, click. That was the sound of the window opening, and that's when I heard it. Rustling, right here in my own house. Rustling that paralyzed me with fear and sent my mind into a state of panic. Then I heard her. Daniel? Daniel, thank goodness I finally reached you. The voice was coming from inside the house now. Daniel, it's me. It's Sarah. Are you there?